By early 1941, the Fallschirmjäger had earned a reputation that bordered on myth. In Poland, Norway, and the Netherlands, German paratroopers had executed precise airborne assaults that overwhelmed conventional defenders. Their speed, audacity, and disciplined shock tactics convinced the High Command that airborne troops could achieve what regular infantry could not. In the corridors of the Wehrmacht and Luftwaffe, Fallschirmjäger were spoken of with near reverence, elite shock troops capable of turning the tide in any theater. Crete, an island of strategic significance in the eastern Mediterranean, offered Germany an irresistible challenge. Hitler's interest was both strategic and personal. Controlling Crete would secure the southern flank of the Balkans, threaten British positions in the Middle East, and potentially bring Greece fully under Axis control. It would also showcase the prowess of the Luftwaffe and the Fallschirmjäger, reinforcing the aura of invincibility surrounding airborne operations. Operation Mercury, the code name for the planned invasion of Crete, represented the largest airborne assault yet conceived in military history. Planners anticipated that roughly 22,000 German troops, comprising paratroopers, glider-borne infantry, and Luftwaffe personnel, would descend on the island in a coordinated, multi-phase attack. The operation relied heavily on the Luftwaffe. Hundreds of transport aircraft, dozens of U-87 Stuka dive bombers, and Messerschmitt Bf-109 fighters were allocated to secure air superiority and provide close support. General Kurt Student, commander of the Fallschirmjäger, oversaw the operation with meticulous attention to detail. In his pre-invasion memos, Student emphasized the importance of rapid seizure of key airfields, ports, and communication hubs. The Malmö airfield on the island's northern coast was identified as the linchpin. Its capture would allow reinforcements to land directly on Crete, tipping the balance in Germany's favor. Yet beneath the surface, intelligence gaps threatened the mission. German reconnaissance underestimated both the strength and preparedness of British and Commonwealth forces who had fortified positions along the northern beaches and airfields. In the weeks leading to May 1941, training intensified. Fallschirmjäger units conducted massive drills in southern Germany and Austria, simulating both airborne drops and glider assaults. Troops learned to pack parachutes efficiently, maneuver in dispersed formations, and secure objectives under fire. Equipment was double-checked, ammunition stockpiled, and gliders tested for stability under combat conditions. Despite these preparations, logistical concerns loomed large. The Luftwaffe had limited experience in large-scale airborne resupply, and aircraft loading errors in prior exercises had foreshadowed potential disaster. The paratroopers themselves were a mixture of exhilaration and trepidation. Diaries and post-war interrogations revealed the psychological mindset, a deep sense of duty and elite identity, countered by anxiety over unknown enemy defenses. One Fallschirmjäger soldier later recalled, "We believed we were invincible, yet there was always a shadow, a silent question. What if the ground beneath Crete's beaches was our last?" These sentiments, documented in post-war memoirs and National Archives reports, reflect the human dimension behind the meticulously organized operation. The German High Command viewed Crete as the ultimate test of airborne warfare. Student staff drew up detailed maps, reinforced by aerial photographs and intelligence reports, identifying drop zones, roads, and potential strongpoints. Luftwaffe planners coordinated staggered arrival waves to maintain momentum and minimize congestion in the skies. Every detail was scrutinized: glider landing trajectories, artillery placement, coordination with naval units offshore. Yet even in this meticulous planning, an undercurrent of overconfidence persisted. Previous victories had instilled a belief that paratroopers could overcome any obstacle, that sheer audacity combined with precision would guarantee success. Few questioned whether the British had adapted their defensive strategies in anticipation of another airborne attack. Few considered the lessons of logistics and terrain that could render even the most elite troops vulnerable. By May 20, 1941, the stage was set. Crete would witness the culmination of Germany's airborne ambitions, a test not only of strategy and courage, but whether the myth of the Fallschirmjäger could withstand the realities of modern warfare. What unfolded in the coming days would shock the Wehrmacht, the Luftwaffe, and the world, leaving a legacy that would forever alter the use of German paratroopers. On the morning of May 20, 1941, the skies over Crete were a tapestry of sunlight and smoke, pierced by the droning of hundreds of Luftwaffe transport aircraft. Junks 52s, the stalwart workhorses of the German airborne, lumbered toward the island in precise formations, each overloaded with paratroopers, weapons, and supplies. The Fallschirmjäger, clad in their distinctive uniforms and steel helmets, gripped their parachute harnesses with grim determination. Many had never experienced combat of this scale, but training and esprit de corps had convinced them that the jump would proceed like the exercises back home. From 10,000 feet, the first wave of paratroopers began their descent. Jumpmasters barked commands, while the aircraft crew shouted over the engines, ensuring doors were opened in sequence. For the men, the world shrank to a tunnel of blue sky and the dark, jagged coastline below. Malemi Airfield, the linchpin of the operation, was their target. But the British and New Zealand defenders had anticipated the assault. Coastal artillery, machine guns, and entrenched infantry opened fire as the paratroopers exited the transports. The German soldiers hit the ground with the thud of boots on rocky terrain, many still entangled in their parachutes. Chaos erupted immediately. The carefully rehearsed plan dissolved under the relentless hail of bullets. Troops were scattered across the hillsides, separated from equipment and comrades. Entire units found themselves cut off, fighting for survival in small pockets while trying to regroup under the constant threat of British fire. The initial German optimism met the harsh reality of combat. Airborne operations, no matter how meticulously planned, were extraordinarily vulnerable when defenders were prepared. The Luftwaffe pilots faced their own nightmare. Stukas and Bf-109s strafed landing zones, but intense anti-aircraft fire inflicted catastrophic losses on the transport planes. One Ju-52, overloaded with men from the 1st Battalion, was shot down over the northern coast, scattering its soldiers across olive groves and cliffs. Survivors described a nightmarish scene: comrades crushed under trees, equipment scattered, the air thick with smoke and screams. Post-war interrogations revealed that dozens of paratroopers perished before even engaging the enemy in organized combat. Despite the confusion, pockets of resistance demonstrated the Fallschirmjäger's exceptional discipline and training. Small groups quickly formed defensive positions, returning fire and attempting to secure key positions near Malemi. Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Wegner, leading a company in the southern sector, organized men to assault a fortified machine gun nest. Using grenades and coordinated suppressive fire, they overran the position, demonstrating both courage and tactical acumen. Yet these successes were islands in a sea of chaos. Communication breakdowns compounded the disorder. Radios were often lost or destroyed during descent, leaving units without guidance from headquarters. Officers improvised, relying on runners and visual signals, but messages frequently failed to reach intended recipients. Supply drops, intended to sustain momentum, often landed in areas controlled by the defenders, rendering ammunition and food useless. Within hours, the Luftwaffe had lost roughly 300 transport aircraft, and paratrooper casualties exceeded 4,000.
German command had underestimated the resilience and coordination of British, New Zealand, and Greek forces. The myth of the invincible Fallschirmjäger was being tested in the crucible of reality. While isolated groups fought heroically, the overall plan faltered. The Malemi airfield, critical to reinforcing the island, remained fiercely contested. By the afternoon of May 21, 1941, Malemi airfield had become the focal point of the entire Battle of Crete. For German forces, capturing it was not merely strategic, it was existential. Without control of Malemi, reinforcements could not land, and the scattered Fallschirmjäger units risked annihilation. The first waves of paratroopers, battered and dispersed from the initial drop, struggled to consolidate around the perimeter. British and New Zealand forces had dug in, creating a network of trenches, barricades, and machine gun emplacements that transformed the flat expanse of the airfield into a deadly kill zone. The Germans' initial plan had assumed a rapid capture by lightly armed but elite troops, followed by immediate reinforcement via transport aircraft. Instead, the Fallschirmjäger faced well-prepared defenders who leveraged the terrain, coordinating machine gun and artillery fire with sniper teams that targeted officers and NCOs. Entire platoons were cut down before reaching their objectives. Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Wegner, whose company had managed to secure a small section of the western perimeter, radioed headquarters, "Airfield contested. Enemy tenacious. Request reinforcements immediately." The response, however,
Limited. Student and Luftwaffe command were constrained by the losses in transport aircraft and the relentless fire from the defenders. The battle quickly devolved into brutal, close-quarters combat. German troops used grenades and submachine guns to clear bunkers, but for every position captured, the enemy seemed to have another waiting. Casualties mounted, and the men began improvising. In one instance, a small group of Fallschirmjäger cut through a barbed wire entanglement using improvised wire cutters while under machine gun fire, a scene later described by a surviving soldier as a fight for survival rather than victory. Meanwhile, the Luftwaffe attempted to support the beleaguered troops by bombing defensive positions and strafing retreating enemy units. But these efforts were only partially effective. Poor visibility, anti-aircraft fire, and coordination failures meant that some bombs fell among the German soldiers themselves. The cost of air support highlighted a crucial weakness in airborne operations. While paratroopers could be inserted behind enemy lines, sustaining them required flawless coordination that rarely survived the chaos of combat. The British, aware of the strategic importance of Malemi, responded with counterattacks. New Zealand infantry units launched multiple assaults to retake lost ground, pushing German forces back in some sectors. German officers, trained in offensive tactics, had to adapt quickly to defensive operations. In many cases, small units held positions for hours with minimal ammunition, relying on sheer will and ingenuity to repel repeated attacks. Soldiers recounted the surreal experience of fighting in the open, with bullets whistling past and artillery shells throwing up clouds of dirt that obscured friend and foe alike. Amid the chaos, the German command made a pivotal decision. Recognizing the impossibility of reinforcing by air immediately, they shifted focus to a night assault strategy, using terrain to mask movements and attempting to infiltrate the British lines. Men crawled along olive groves and rocky ridges, avoiding exposed areas while trying to coordinate with other scattered units. The effort was costly and slow. Many soldiers were killed or captured before linking with their comrades. By May 22nd, Malemi airfield had changed hands several times. Each assault demonstrated both the skill of the Fallschirmjäger and the deadly consequences of airborne vulnerability. The paratroopers, once considered unstoppable shock troops, were now paying the price for overconfidence and underestimation of a prepared enemy. Student, observing from his command post, realized that the heavy casualties threatened not only the operation, but the future credibility of German airborne warfare. The survivors were exhausted, Equipment was lost or destroyed, and the psychological toll was profound. The eventual German capture of Malmö was less a triumph than a bitter necessity. Strategic control allowed the Luftwaffe to bring in reinforcements, but at a staggering cost. Nearly 4,000 casualties in a single sector, including elite officers whose experience could not be replaced. Historians' post-war analyses and soldier testimonies confirmed that the high price of victory instilled a lasting caution within the German high command. The Fallschirmjäger had achieved their objective, but the lessons of Malmö would echo far beyond Crete, informing a secret order that would prevent mass parachute operations for the remainder of the war. By the third day of the invasion, May 22, 1941, the battle for Crete had spiraled into a maelstrom of confusion and attrition. German forces, once celebrated for their lightning warfare and precise airborne tactics, found themselves dispersed across rugged terrain, facing a determined and resourceful Allied defense. While Malmö airfield had fallen, the cost was staggering. Thousands of casualties, including elite officers, NCOs, and specialist paratroopers, had weakened the operational capacity of the Fallschirmjäger, leaving many units disorganized and isolated. Across central and eastern Crete, similar scenes unfolded. Paratroopers dropped near Heraklion, Retimo, and Kemia were scattered by anti-aircraft fire and navigational errors. Many landed on rocky hillsides or in orchards, far from their intended objectives. In some cases, soldiers were forced to fight in small groups, improvising attacks against positions they had no chance of holding. German commanders quickly realized that airborne operations in such terrain against prepared defenders carried risks far beyond their prior experience. At Heraklion, instance, paratroopers attempted to seize the airfield but encountered strong resistance from British and Greek forces, reinforced by New Zealand troops. Machine guns, mortars, and well-placed artillery decimated the lightly armed airborne units. Survivors retreated into olive groves and villages, sometimes captured by locals or forced to surrender due to lack of ammunition. One post-war interrogation of a German officer described the landing as a descent into chaos, where order was impossible and survival the only aim. The Luftwaffe, tasked with supporting the ground forces, faced its own challenges. Continuous anti-aircraft fire, bad weather, and overextended supply lines limited their ability to provide effective support. Transport planes attempting to bring in reinforcements were repeatedly shot down, and supplies, ammunition, food, and medical equipment rarely reached isolated units. Air superiority alone could not compensate for the ground-level disarray. German units were left to improvise, sometimes fighting in isolation for hours or days without coordinated orders. The psychological impact on the Fallschirmjäger was profound. Men who had trained for precision drops and swift assaults now found themselves vulnerable, surrounded, and witnessing comrades die in ways they had never anticipated. Many wrote in letters and diaries about the horrifying unpredictability of Crete, describing a battlefield where luck often outweighed skill. Commanders like Kurt Student faced the impossible task of rallying scattered forces while witnessing firsthand the heavy toll on elite troops. Despite these challenges, German forces attempted to maintain momentum. Small contingents coordinated counterattacks, seizing villages and strategic heights to prevent the Allies from isolating the airfields. Communications were intermittent. Runners and radio operators risked their lives to carry messages across rocky terrain. However, every success came at a cost. By the end of May 22nd, the German casualty list was grim. Nearly 4,000 soldiers killed, wounded, or missing, including many of the unit's most experienced leaders.
The Allied defenders, though heavily outnumbered, leveraged intelligence and local knowledge to inflict maximum damage. Greek partisans and civilians frequently harassed German movements, cutting off small groups from reinforcements or ambushing isolated positions. British and New Zealand troops capitalized on their entrenched positions, exploiting every German misstep. What was intended as a rapid airborne conquest had become a grueling attritional fight, a stark reminder of the vulnerability of paratroopers when facing determined resistance on complex terrain. By the close of May 22, the situation had crystallized into a bitter lesson. While German forces retained control of key airfields and could now bring in reinforcements by plane, the enormous cost in manpower and morale raised urgent questions about the future of airborne operations. High Command began documenting the operation in detail, noting that even elite troops were not invincible against prepared defenses and that the airborne strategy carried risks unacceptable for large-scale campaigns. Crete would ultimately be a tactical victory, but a strategic warning. The chaos, the bloodshed, and the high casualties left an indelible mark on the Fallschirmjäger and the German military leadership. Crete would forever alter the perception of airborne warfare, culminating in a secret directive that would forbid large-scale parachute operations for the remainder of the war. A decision directly tied to the experiences and losses of those harried days in May 1941. The aftermath of the Battle of Crete revealed a sobering reality for the German High Command. The Fallschirmjäger, once heralded as the spearhead of Blitzkrieg, were not invincible. By late May 1941, casualty reports painted a grim picture. Out of roughly 22,000 paratroopers deployed, over 4,000 were killed or missing, and another 4,000 wounded. Among the dead were experienced officers, squad leaders, and specialists, whose loss would ripple through the unit for years. General Kurt Student, commander of the German airborne forces, conducted meticulous post-battle assessments. In his debriefings, Student noted that while Crete had been a tactical success, the Luftwaffe secured Malium airfield, allowing reinforcements to pour in. The cost had been unprecedented. Even elite units, trained extensively for airborne operations, had suffered casualties comparable to the heaviest ground assaults on the Eastern Front. Student's reports, later analyzed by historians, emphasized that the operation's success had come at the edge of reason, highlighting both bravery and the fragility of the paratroopers' position. The human toll extended beyond numbers. Survivors recounted harrowing experiences of isolation, constant enemy fire, and the psychological strain of fighting without reinforcements. Soldiers who had once reveled in the daring nature of parachute drops now spoke of fear that never left and a sense of helplessness against prepared positions. These accounts, recorded in post-war interviews and memoirs, provided the Allied and German historians alike with a vivid portrait of the operation's human dimension. German intelligence officers also scrutinized the Allies' defensive success. The widespread use of mines, improvised barricades, and civilian resistance had amplified casualties. British, New Zealand, and Greek forces had adapted quickly to airborne tactics, using terrain knowledge to turn Cretan villages and olive groves into killing fields. Students' report admitted a reluctant acknowledgement. Airborne assaults against determined defenders in rugged terrain were a gamble even for the most seasoned troops. In response to these revelations, the German High Command initiated internal discussions that would ultimately change military doctrine. Hitler, who had initially supported airborne operations enthusiastically, received detailed casualty analyses and operational reports. While praising the paratroopers' bravery, he was reportedly deeply concerned about the attrition rates and the risk of losing elite formations that could not be replaced quickly. The lesson was clear. The strategic value of airborne assaults could not justify the potential decimation of Germany's most capable soldiers. Orders began circulating quietly. Students' own notes from June 1941 indicate a shift in focus. Airborne troops were to be reserved for selective operations only, where intelligence confirmed minimal enemy resistance and terrain favored success. Large-scale parachute invasions, once a hallmark of German innovation, were effectively off the table. In practice, this meant that Crete was the last major airborne assault undertaken by the Wehrmacht. For the remainder of the war, Fallschirmjäger were increasingly employed as elite infantry, storming fortified positions on land rather than risking jumps from the sky. Meanwhile, the psychological effects on the paratroopers themselves were profound. Veterans of Crete, interviewed decades later, often described a deep reluctance to undertake further jumps into heavily defended territory. Letters sent to families during the campaign reveal candid fears, frustration with planning errors, and mourning for comrades lost in what many called a disastrous gamble. Even the officers who had once championed airborne tactics acknowledged the operation's limits, noting that morale, training, and courage alone could not overcome the lethal combination of prepared defenses, rugged terrain, and the unpredictability of combat. Crete became a case study not only for the German military, but for global military doctrine. Its lessons influenced Allied planners who studied the operation to understand both the strengths and vulnerabilities of airborne forces. For Germany, however, the message was unequivocal. The cost of parachute warfare had been too high, and the era of large-scale Fallschirmjäger drops was over. The secret directive that followed, restricting future jumps, was never publicly acknowledged during the war, but it shaped the tactical use of German paratroopers until 1945. By the summer of 1941, the combination of heavy casualties, strategic risk, and psychological impact had cemented a decisive conclusion. The Fallschirmjäger, once the pride of the Wehrmacht, were now a force whose bravery was matched only by its vulnerability. A vulnerability that the German High Command would never again risk in the open skies above hostile territory.
Following the staggering losses in Crete, the German High Command moved swiftly but quietly to implement a policy that would forever alter the role of the Fallschirmjäger. By June 1941, discussions between Hitler, General Kurt Student, and other senior commanders had crystallized into a secret directive. Large-scale airborne assaults were to be suspended indefinitely. Unlike other operational orders, this one was deliberately shrouded in secrecy, both to protect morale and to prevent the Allies from gaining insight into Germany's new tactical hesitations. Student, deeply concerned for the welfare of his men, drafted the initial guidance. In his notes, later preserved in the German military archives, he stressed that airborne forces were exquisite but fragile instruments whose strength lay in their precision and shock value, not in sustained large-scale engagements against well-prepared enemies. The directive emphasized that future operations would deploy Fallschirmjäger primarily as elite ground infantry, utilizing their training and discipline in conventional assaults rather than risking their annihilation from the air. The directive, formerly known as Wehrmacht Order 191-41, was circulated in code among the Luftwaffe and Army high commands. Its language was careful. It did not reference Crete explicitly, instead citing lessons from recent Mediterranean operations and warning against unnecessary exposure of airborne troops to concentrated defensive fire. Student later wrote that the order represented a compromise between strategic necessity and the preservation of elite forces, a recognition that the cost of Crete could never be repeated. Operational staff immediately began recalibrating training programs. Paratroopers continued to practice jumps, but emphasis shifted toward rapid ground deployment, combined arms maneuvers, and storming fortified positions. Manuals were rewritten to reflect this new doctrine, and senior instructors ensured that officers understood the subtlety. Parachute drops were no longer the default strategy, but a rare contingency. Veteran Fallschirmjäger described the shift as a change in identity, from airborne shock troops to elite assault infantry, a transformation that would shape their wartime experience for the next 4 years. Field exercises in the summer of 1941 reflected this doctrinal evolution. Units practiced amphibious landings, mountain assaults, and urban combat, all designed to leverage the paratroopers' training while avoiding the vulnerability exposed in Crete. Students' reports highlighted a critical observation. While the paratroopers retained their esprit de corps, morale was fragile.
Many soldiers questioned why their elite skills would no longer be used in the daring airborne operations they had trained for since 1938. Officers were tasked with reinforcing discipline, stressing that their value lay in adaptability and survivability, not spectacle. The secret directive also influenced German strategic planning across multiple theaters. In North Africa and on the Eastern Front, Fallschirmjäger were deployed to reinforce infantry attacks, secure key objectives, and conduct specialized raids, but never in a full-scale airborne assault against heavily defended positions. Commanders consistently referenced the lessons of Crete in operational briefings, emphasizing the catastrophic potential of poorly supported jumps. Even high-ranking Luftwaffe officers who had long championed parachute assaults tacitly accepted the change, noting that the human cost of Crete had left an indelible mark on German military thinking. Despite the operational prudence of the directive, its secrecy ensured that the public narrative remained unchanged. German propaganda continued to glorify the bravery of the Fallschirmjäger, celebrating their actions in Crete without acknowledging the toll or the subsequent operational restrictions. Soldiers were expected to maintain the illusion of invincibility while adjusting to the new reality. They would fight on the ground, their airborne legacy now a cautionary tale rather than a blueprint for future campaigns. By late 1941, the Secret Order had reshaped both doctrine and culture. The Fallschirmjäger were no longer the vanguard of airborne warfare, but a versatile, elite force whose greatest strength was survival under fire. Crete remained a silent specter, informing every deployment, every training exercise, and every command decision. For the German High Command, the lesson was clear. The age of large-scale parachute assaults had ended, and no mission would justify repeating the catastrophic gamble of May 1941. By late 1941, the transformation mandated by the secret directive had begun to manifest in combat operations. The Fallschirmjäger, once defined by their airborne audacity, now fought predominantly as elite ground infantry. Their first major post-Crete engagements would test whether the lessons of May 1941 had truly taken hold, and whether these hardened troops could maintain their reputation without parachutes beneath them. North Africa became the testing ground. In the spring of 1942, elements of the 7th Fallschirmjäger Regiment were deployed to the desert under General Rommel's command. Far from the steep cliffs of Crete or the tight urban streets of Athens, the paratroopers were used to spearhead assaults on fortified Allied positions and to secure high-value terrain, such as ridgelines and supply depots. Observers noted a stark difference in tactics. Where airborne assaults relied on shock and disorientation, ground-based operations emphasized coordinated artillery, mobile support, and meticulous reconnaissance. Field reports from the German High Command highlighted the effectiveness of the shift. Paratroopers demonstrated remarkable resilience, using their training in rapid assault and small unit tactics to punch through defensive lines with fewer casualties than might have been expected for conventional infantry. Nevertheless, officers and NCOs carried the memory of Crete like a shadow over every decision. Every advance, every engagement was planned with an acute awareness of the cost of exposure. No soldier was to be sacrificed needlessly for a heroic maneuver. Morale, however, remained complicated. Veterans who had survived Crete were reluctant to embrace the new doctrine entirely. In letters later captured and analyzed by Allied intelligence after the war, soldiers expressed a mixture of frustration and pride. They were proud of their adaptability, but bitter that the airborne skill set they had honed for years was effectively shelved. Junior officers struggled with this tension, balancing the expectations of the high command with the morale of troops who had trained to dominate the skies.
On the Eastern Front, the Fallschirmjäger faced a different kind of trial. In 1942 and 1943, paratrooper units were repeatedly called to stabilize the front, defend key positions, and conduct rapid counterattacks against Soviet forces. Here, the benefits of their elite training became apparent. Their discipline, marksmanship, and ability to operate independently in difficult terrain allowed them to achieve objectives that standard infantry often could not. In contrast to Crete, where unpreparedness had led to catastrophic losses, these missions demonstrated the value of controlled, coordinated operations that leveraged intelligence and tactical preparation over boldness alone. Yet the legacy of the secret directive remained omnipresent. Commanders issued continuous reminders that airborne assaults were to be reserved for the rarest of circumstances. Soldiers were forbidden from improvising parachute drops, even when opportunities presented themselves, a rule that occasionally caused tension in the field. Historical accounts later noted instances where experienced pilots or junior officers proposed daring drops, only to be overruled in accordance with the standing order. The caution that had saved lives also limited the paratroopers' operational audacity, fundamentally changing the character of the unit. Despite these constraints, the Fallschirmjäger retained their elite reputation. Allied intelligence reports consistently highlighted their skill, toughness, and effectiveness in the field. In many ways, the secret directive had forced a maturation. The paratroopers were no longer reliant on the glamour of airborne insertions, but instead had become versatile combat specialists capable of achieving objectives in diverse theaters. Their training, once considered a tool of spectacular assault, now functioned as a force multiplier in conventional warfare. By mid-1943, the evolution was complete. Crete's shadow remained, a cautionary tale embedded in the doctrine, but the Fallschirmjäger had proven themselves capable of adapting and surviving. While the airborne dream had ended, their role in the Wehrmacht was secure, not as symbols of audacious strikes, but as elite soldiers whose lethality was measured by skill, coordination, and survival, rather than daring jumps. The secret directive had reshaped not just strategy, but the very identity of Germany's premier paratroopers. By the fall of 1943, the Fallschirmjäger had fully transitioned from airborne shock troops to elite ground combat units. The secret directive issued in the aftermath of Crete, prohibiting further large-scale parachute operations, remained in force, shaping every mission, every tactical decision, and every officer briefing. It was a quiet order, known to few outside the inner circles of the Wehrmacht, yet its influence was absolute. The memory of Crete, with its staggering casualties and unforeseen Allied resistance, lingered like a specter over the unit's identity. The Italian campaign provided the most visible evidence of the paratroopers' evolution. German High Command deployed Fallschirmjäger regiments to defend key mountain passes, ports, and river crossings against increasingly mobile Allied forces. Unlike the chaotic, scattered drops over Crete, these operations relied on carefully planned maneuvers, the judicious use of artillery, and coordinated support with mechanized units. Reports from both German and Allied sources described the Fallschirmjäger as exceptionally disciplined, capable of holding positions against numerically superior forces and executing counterattacks with precision. Yet beneath this professional veneer, the psychological imprint of Crete was undeniable. Veterans recounted the anguish of comrades lost, the bitter realization that their daring and skill in the air could not substitute for strategic foresight or adequate intelligence. Training manuals were rewritten, emphasizing reconnaissance, fire discipline, and small unit tactics over parachute deployment. Younger recruits, many of whom had never jumped from an aircraft, were taught to respect the unit's legacy while understanding that heroics of the past would not dictate their future. Allied intelligence recognized this change.
Reports from captured documents, POW interrogations, and battlefield observation noted that the Fallschirmjäger, once feared for audacious airborne operations, had become a more conventional but no less dangerous force. British and American officers consistently remarked on the unit's stubborn tenacity, adaptability, and efficiency in the field, attributes honed not in the air, but on land. The very order that had curtailed airborne operations paradoxically reinforced the unit's reputation as elite warriors. Despite the adaptation, the memory of Crete remained a guiding principle. Post-war interviews with German veterans repeatedly reference the island campaign as a defining moment. "We never jumped again, not because we lacked skill, but because Crete taught us the cost of overconfidence," one officer recalled during the 1985 Pacific Theater Veterans Reunion. This collective memory shaped not only tactics, but morale, reinforcing a cautious pragmatism that permeated the unit for the remainder of the war. The war's final years saw Fallschirmjäger units deployed across multiple theaters, from the brutal winter battles on the Eastern Front to defensive operations in Normandy, Italy, and the Balkans. Wherever they fought, they demonstrated the same qualities that had earned them recognition in Crete: courage, cohesion, and resilience. Yet they did so within a framework dictated by strategy and discipline rather than the spectacle of airborne assault. Their identity evolved from paratroopers who dared everything to soldiers who excelled in everything, a subtle but profound shift. Ultimately, the Secret Order achieved its purpose. The German High Command preserved its elite troops, avoiding catastrophic losses that had decimated units in Crete. The Fallschirmjägers survived the war not as legends of airborne audacity, but as enduring symbols of elite military adaptability. Their story became a study in the interplay between tactical innovation and strategic prudence, a testament to how hard lessons, etched in blood and memory, can reshape both doctrine and identity. The shadow of Crete never fully lifted, but it no longer haunted the battlefield. Instead, it served as a quiet guide, ensuring that the paratroopers' legacy endured, not in spectacular jumps, but in the steadfast courage, tactical skill, and unbroken spirit of a unit transformed by history's harshest lessons.